Imagine if we still did not know what DNA looked like. How would we study it? What if we could not study antibiotic resistance? If females had been kept out of science, we may not know the familiar double helix that is commonly recognized as DNA. We might still be living in grave fear of a serious infection. Yet in both of these cases, neither female scientist who played a direct role in the discoveries was given credit. Female scientists in the early 20th century faced educational and career barriers, yet even those who overcame were often not credited for their scientific contributions, all because of their gender. As a major in both psychology and biology, I've studied both the struggles of early female scientists from a social standpoint, as well as their contributions to science. I've become especially interested because of the drastic differences between my experience seeking a science degree and that of women before me. Scientific advances in the 20th century have been astounding. Many women were involved in these advances, yet even after overcoming the gender bias of their era and received a sufficient education and training, many were not given credit for their scientific contributions. The first major barrier to overcome was simply getting an education. The societal expectation for the first part of the 20th century was that women would not need a higher education because they were expected to become wives and mothers. In her book, The Madame Curie Complex, Julie Desjardins wrote about the societal expectations of women in the 1940s and 50s. While women were allowed to take math and science classes, male faculty continually reminded them that men would not find them desirable. In one chapter, physicist Ellen Weaver talks about the cultural norms at the time. Saying of the 1950s, quote, "There was a strong feeling that women should be at home," quote. This was an overall tone for women at the time, and it was shared by educators. Gaining entrance into an upper-level science program was extraordinarily difficult, even for the most qualified and brilliant female students. One such scientist, Rosalind Yalow, a Nobel Peace Prize winner, had to take a circuitous route to graduate school by obtaining an assistant teaching position at the University of Illinois. This position allowed her to enter graduate school. Yalow comments on her experience. At the first meeting of the Faculty of College of Engineering, I discovered I was the only woman among its 400 members. The Dean of Faculty congratulated me on my achievement and told me I was the first woman there since 1917. It is evident that the draft of young men into the armed forces had made it possible for my entrance into graduate school. And this was a woman who went on to win a Nobel Peace Prize for her accomplishments. So imagine what difficulty less brilliant women had. Those who were able to obtain a sufficient education still faced problems once they graduated with finding work in their chosen field. Qualified and educated female scientists were unable to work as paid scientists because of anti-nepotism rules and the general idea that women were not competent to work in a lab. A series on women in science, done by PBS, describes the attitude towards women in the early 20th century as the prevailing view in the scientific world was that a laboratory was no place for a woman. Thus, many women were excluded from working in labs or heading any project of their own. Many were forced to work without salary if they wanted to make use of their education. Being married to a male scientist did not make it easier to find employment as a female scientist. Almost every university had anti-nepotism rules, which meant that wives could not hold a paid position if their husband also held a paid position. Anti-nepotism rules forced the wives to take paid, unpaid, or voluntary positions, but this was not only limited to those who were married. Acquiring gainful employment as a female scientist, whether married or single, was a rare thing in the early 20th century. Whether paid or not for their work, many women scientists overcame education and work barriers only to find that they were not credited for their contributions to science. In her article on female scientists who experienced sexism, Jane Lee of National Geographic magazine pointed out that female researchers who had to work as volunteer faculty members seen credit for their significant discoveries they've made assigned to male colleagues and have been written out of textbooks. Let's examine a couple of the women that Jane Lee wrote about. Rosalind Franklin specialized in X-ray technology, and she used her knowledge to take the first photograph of DNA. This photo is known infamously as Photo 51 and was shown without Franklin's permission or knowledge to a pair of scientists who used it to deduce the structure of DNA. Franklin was never mentioned in the Nobel Peace Prize that was awarded to the 3 other scientists who pieced together the structure of DNA, which was based solely on her photograph. The story of Edith Lederberg is another example. She made many contributions to science, but the one we'll look at is the method that she and her husband came up for easily transferring bacterial colonies to a petri dish. This method, known as the Lederberg method, is still used by modern scientists. What the Lederbergs accomplished allowed the study of antibiotic resistance. Her husband went on to win a Nobel Peace Prize, in part for his work on the Lederberg method. Edith Lederberg, however, never received credit for her role. There are many more stories, but the circumstances for these women is clear. Despite overcoming social expectations to gain education and experience in their field, women scientists in the early 20th century often had to watch others take credit for their work. I only gave a small example of the great contributions that women made to science in the 20th century. Many of these pioneering women improved all of our lives without the merit or compensation that they deserved. Knowing the challenges that these pioneering scientists faced can help us to appreciate their contributions to science and the doors that they opened for women in science in the following generations.